Hi, I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters in Omaha, and tonight we're doing a stimulator. The stimulator of today is often attributed to author and commercial tire Randall Kaufman. He certainly made the fly well known through his books and articles in the 1980s, but his version isn't, it's really a variation of a fly that had an evolving past. So in the 1940s, Pat Barnes of New Jersey created a fly called the sofa pillow. It was tied on a Mustad 9672, which is basically it's a 3X long streamer hook. It had a tail of red duckquill, a red floss body, a wing of squirrel tail, and then a brown hackle in front of the wing. In the 1950s, he created the improved sofa pillow. Pat changed the tail and wing to deer hair, and he added a palmered brown saddle hackle through the body and thorax, and that was all clipped real short. Then Jim Slattery of West Yellowstone, Montana, was inspired by the improved sofa pillow, and he created a fly that he called the stimulator. Jim's version extended the thorax to about half, um, basically the same length as the abdomen, about half and half. The abdomen was a yellow olive, and the thorax was orange. And he used a blue dun hackle for the palmered abdomen and thorax. In 1980, Randall Kaufman introduced his own variant that he called the yellow stimulator. He changed to elk hair for the wing, Antron yarn for the abdomen, and Angora goat for the thorax. The abdomen hackle was not clipped, but was smaller than the hook size calls for. So if it's a size 6, then you would use like a size 8 hackle or a size 10. He also changed the hook to a Tiemco 200R, which is a curved shank nymph hook. That's what I have in the vise right now. Not a Tiemco 200R necessarily, but it's a curved shank nymph hook. He used the thorax. He returned the thorax to a third of the total body length and tied it in a size 6 and 8 for stoneflies, 12 and 14 for yellow sallies, and down to a 16 and 18 for caddis. It's an outstanding representation of a clumsy, fluttering stoneflies, and it can be used as a hopper. The deer elk hair wing and tail, along with the heavy hackle, make it a very buoyant fly that works well as an indicator fly in a dry dropper. So team it with a small nymph emerger or a small dry fly. So Lee joined us too. Welcome, Lee. I'm going to change to the materials camera. And for the first one, if there's time, I'll do a different one. For the first one, I'm going to do pretty much the Kaufman stimulator, which again, a curved shank hook. I'm going to use elk hair. I really haven't used that in many demonstrations so far, but I have some cow elk and some bull elk. I think for this yellow stimulator, I'll use the bull elk. Can you see that? It's a little bit lighter in color. Overall, it doesn't really have like marked tips, but it does have, you can see the crinkly, I don't know if you can tell it on the camera. You can see that they're crinkly and a little bit, the actual hairs are thick towards the end. And for the tail, we talk a lot about the right hair to use for the right purposes. And Al has a good presentation on tails and wings using the strip along the along the back of the deer, that's the dark colored deer hair, as being good for wings and tails. And the reason is, the reason it's dark as well is that the real air filled, pithy part of the actual hair follicle, the hair is, it's thicker down toward the base, but toward the tips, it's very narrow, and so therefore it doesn't really flare when you tie down on it. So for wings and tails, you don't want them to flare a whole lot. In the case of the stimulator, you want the tail to flare a little bit. You want the wing to flare a little bit less, as much. So basically, I'll use this because it's nice and long and it has the color I want. And I know that the tips will flare just a little bit and the wing won't flare as much. And I'll kind of work on that a little bit as we get to that step. For the body, so the tail, of course, is deer hair or elk. In this case, it'll be the elk. I need a fine wire. Let me reach up here and grab it real quick. I'm just going to use gold because it's the easiest to grab. The body will be yellow dubbing, preferably dry fly. I really like the color of this soft touch Al's BT's blend here. So I'm going to use that for the abdomen, and for the thorax, I don't have orange other than this sow and scub dubbing. So I'm going to use that for the thorax. And it's palmered with a brown or ginger hackle for the body hackle. And the front part, the thorax, is palmered with grizzly. So that's what I'll use for that. And basically, I'm using this these genetic hackles. You can see those. I'm a little bit off center. Keo makes them, Whiting makes them. I think those are the most popular. You can get a lot of them from Hairline or different outlets, and you can get them in different sizes. You can actually buy them for 14s and 16s. This one is supposedly size 16. The way I have seen it, size 16 in the Whitings usually means it's kind of close to 14 to almost 18. But it's real close to being, you can just about use any of these on 16s. They're sized pretty good. But some of the other ones aren't as accurate. They're just like long genetic hackles. Some of these are 12 inches. And so you can use it for a lot of flies. And then for the thorax, I said I was going to use the orange with a grizzly palmer and then just a thread head. So I've got, I think, what I need over here, except for my glasses. I'll switch to the other camera. And there's my curved shank nymph hook. Now I'm gonna kind of make that a little bit more horizontal there for the hook shank. For this first one, I'm gonna use an orange thread. I just kind of want to end up with an orange head, and I'm going to start about a third of the way back, just to kind of remind myself that I don't want to go too far forward with the dubbing or the other materials. And I'm just going to kind of lay down a thread base here. something I've seen a lot of recently. There's a lot of people you see on YouTube where their bobbin is real short like this, and they go real short to the hook shank like this. And that just makes me cringe because it's pretty easy to end up with the point of the hook inside your bobbin tube. And you'll take that ceramic and put a nick in it, and it'll cut your thread. So ideally, I like about 1.5 inches out from the hook shank to the tip of my bobbin. So then if I'm going around the point of the hook, I can go at an angle. But I just keep that at about a consistent 1.5 inches if I can. So the first thing I'm going to do is the tail, and I'm going to grab about maybe 9 or 5, maybe 12 or 6 hairs. Clip them close to the hide, and then just like with deer hair, I've got a whole lot of underfur in this elk here. You can see it right there. I'm going to take the underfur and the short ones out of there over my bin, and then I'm going to stack this hair because I want all of the tail tips to be aligned. So I put them in my hair stacker, tap it, and now I want to open the stacker so that the points are sticking out toward the back. If you take the inside of your stacker and just set it on your bench, it's going to roll off and land at your feet. So you need to always put that back in the stacker. So for the tail, I went back to where I let the thread hang. It goes right down to the barb of the hook. But in order to tie the tail in, I'm going to actually come forward to a little bit back from that 1/3 point. Again, Al talks in a few years ago, he did a video on material creep. And if I bring my thread all the way to that point, and then I go to tie my hair down, by the time I get those butts tied down, those butts are going to be about maybe 3 wraps forward. And if I keep doing that, then it's going to eventually crowd the eye and I'm going to be in trouble. So if that's the mark that I want for the 1/3 point of my hook shank, I don't want my abdomen to go too far forward. So what I want is for the tail to end up being about a hook gap for the tail itself. So if I line it up like that and then kind of mark it with my other thumb there, I'm going to zoom out some here. I tend to get a little bit too tight on the hook there. So again, I want that tail to be about that long, so to be about a hook gap past the bend. And then I want to tie it down right there. So I see a lot of people, they'll go ahead and tie this in, and then they've got all the butts that have flared up and they're in their way. The way I like to do these types of flies is cut those butts off ahead of time. And then, so if I've been wrapping and my, as you wrap your thread, you put a twist into it. If you try to catch those butts and the thread reaches forward, then all you got to do is twist it counterclockwise as if you were looking down from above. And that'll make the thread kind of reach back toward the back, and you can grab just those tips and give it a good wrap over and then pull straight down. So that gives me a nice little sunburst at the front. And I've tied those tips in. Now I can kind of take spaced wraps back toward the back. And when I get back to the back and tie that down, that gives me a nice flared tail. And then I can come back to the hook point. Now, I've got this tied in pretty good to where it's not going to spin, but also it gives me a little bit of flotation, a little bit of air in there. So I want to do some yellow dubbing. First, I need to tie in the rib. So I'm going to take that, just some real fine wire. It can be gold, copper, silver. It doesn't show, so it doesn't really matter. So it's whatever you have. I'm going to grab about, maybe 9 or 5 inches. And I'm going to tie that in. I'm going to go ahead and leave the point of it up toward that 1/3 point. Take a couple good wraps right back there at the back. So that's tied in securely. And I'm going to come forward. I want that to kind of be, I don't want it to mess my tail up too much. So I just want to make sure that's toward the back of the fly, away from me. Then I'm going to lower the angle here a little bit. I'm going to stretch out some thread. And this is just the tacky wax. This 140 denier thread. Doesn't have to be orange. It can be whatever color you want to use, but I'm just going to put some of this tacky wax on there. I don't want any clumps. And then I'm going to take the yellow. It's a nice bright yellow color. Take some out of there, and then I'm just going to start applying it to the thread. I think my dubbing wax is actually kind of dry. Let me.
Yeah, Mike, you often have to, when it's dry like that, you scrape it over a piece of paper and get that little layer off.
Kind of like that.
Oh, you were ahead of me.
All right. Now I have some tacky dubbing wax. I'm going to go back, even though I've got a little bit of dubbing in there. I want about maybe 3 inches, at least to start with. I think I'm going to have to get the new stuff out. Twist it counterclockwise. I'm going to grab this now and just take small amounts and add to it. Now, the reason I went toward the hook point is because I can use that bare thread up toward the top to work my way back toward the back of the fly. And then I can wrap forward for the body. So I'm just grabbing tiny amounts and adding it to the thread just to bulk up that body. There we go. That'll get me quite a ways. Now I'll take that yellow dubbing, bring that forward, I'm going to need a wee bit more. So I'll just hold that in my hand I'm holding the bobbin with. Just strip out some fibers, a few at a time. I'm going to need, that's a little bulky. Right about there. Get right up to where that head is. And now I'm still about a third of the way back from the hook. And there's my wire for the ribbing. I'll move that back in the material clip here. Now I want to use for the body hackle, kind of like about a, like kind of a brown, like a ginger brown color. And if you look at, even on these genetic ones, if you kind of strip back some of the barbules like this,
Can't see it, Mike. You're too high.
too high.
Yeah, there you go, sir.
You can kind of see that sometimes it's, I think Gretchen calls it Christmas tree shaped. If you have some longer ones at the bottom, you can kind of clip those off. But I want a little bit of a space there. When I tie it down, I want to make sure there's a little bit of stem sticking up from where my thread is, so that when I start to wrap the hackle, I'm not tying down those, wrapping over itself. Now, a lot of times on a woolly bugger, I've always said, make sure you do 1 or 2 wraps at the front, because otherwise it'll kind of make your woolly bugger into a corkscrew. On a fly like this, you've got a wing and you've got a front hackle and everything else. So back here, it doesn't really matter. You can go ahead into like a spiral wrap here. Ideally, you want this to be about the hook gap, a little bit shorter than the front hackle. So in this case, it's right at about the hook gap. And I'm just doing spaced wraps back here to where the wire rib is. And then I'm going to take that out. And then I'm going to take 1 wrap just to hold that in place so I don't have to hold on to it anymore. I wrap that thread forward just to kind of get it out of my way. Now, for wrapping a wire rib, a lot of people go zigzagging back and forth and everything. The best way to do a wire rib is just to pretend the hackle isn't even there. And the reason for that is, move this out of the way. The reason for that is, as if you wrap it fast, if you wrap it real slow and carefully, you're going to trap those fibers. If you just take it and wrap forward quickly, the hackles actually spring out of the way. And so you can see there, I didn't tie very many of them down at all. Now I made about 3 wraps there underneath where my thorax is going to be. And that's just going to let me make it easier to tie that off. I don't have to worry about it getting loose. And so I can just take a couple wraps over that and hold my thread real tight, and then just a little pressure on it and a couple twists, and that'll come right off. Then, if you're brave, you can break it off, but it's better to leave a little bit of a nub there, so it won't pull out and cut that hackle loose. I can use that actually for another fly. So there's your body. Next thing that goes on is the wing. So that's where I'm going to come back to this elk hair. And I'm going to take probably twice what I used for the tail. Might be a little bit too much, but I'll kind of judge as I get closer. So again, there's my tips. It's always better to cut off a little bit more than you need, and then you can always slim it down. So I'm going to reach way out here toward, these outer tips, because I don't want any of
Bring
the
it down,
short
Mike.
hairs.
Mike, bring it down.
I'm sorry.
There you go. Good.
Yep. I don't want any of these short hairs because they're not the same density and they're not going to look the same. So I want to grab out here toward the tips and then just pull all that stuff away. So I'm doing that over the bin so I don't make a mess right in front. But what I'm left with now is just those longer hairs. So right now those are all ugly. So I'm going to take my stacker again. And put the tips in there. And then all of my tips are aligned. And again, I want to take it out of the stacker. I don't want to take it out this way and have to flip it around in my hands because all my tips will get uneven. I want it to come out in the direction that I'm going to tie it in. So come out like that. Now I'm going to take a look at how that looks as a wing. It's maybe a little bit bulky. So I'm just going to, just off the top, I'm just going to peel about maybe 9 or 5 of those away. And then that looks like a good wing. With wings on elk hair caddis or this kind of a fly, if you get it exactly where you want it and then you tie it down, it's going to flare a little bit and it's going to look a little bit too short. My rule of thumb has always been go about halfway down the tail and tie it in at that point. So again, I'm going to put the wing where I want it to be in relation to the tail. I'm going to hold it like this and then come over waist bin and clip those butt ends. Now, a little bit towards myself, I'm leaning that hair a little bit towards myself. And then you can see the thread is reaching back. I'm going to pull down tight and then go one more turn and pull real tight. So then I get that sunburst. Now that's flared a little bit more than what I want it to be. So I can take just kind of medium wraps and start coming back up. The wing a little ways. Just some lighter wraps, and that kind of condenses that tail, or the wing, I mean. We'll see how that kind of brings it down a little bit. Then as I come back forward, I can come back down into these butts and really torque down. And then my wing is under control. So my thorax up here is going to be some orange dubbing. And I want a little bit of kind of a cone shape, if you will. So using my thread, I just kind of built like a little bit of a base there for the dubbing. Again, the only nice orange colored dubbing that I have is this Sow and Scud dubbing, but first, though, I want to tie in my grizzly hackle. So for front part of the fly, and again, this is the Yellow Stimulator by Randall Kaufman. I'm going to strip back some of those fibers. I've got a real narrow stem there. This is one of the whiting hackles. The pretty side facing toward me. Take that hackle stem and tie it down nice and tight, and then come back. Then I'm going to take some this sow and scud dubbing. This is a little bit longer fibers. Again, I'm just going to take a few at a time. Zoom out some. This has some longer guard hairs in it. Of course, not necessary in here. If you had some like super fine or equivalent dry fly dubbing, that'd be perfect for this. And I'm going to work back toward the back here, and then just make sure I have a nice full orange dubbing here. And then I'm going to take that grizzly hackle and palmer my grizzly hackle through that orange. And then come up to the front. Take a couple wraps over that hackle. And then tie in a head, kind of pinning that hackle back. Then I can do a back to front whip finish. Flip the thread and then the hackle. And that is a yellow stimulator. Now,
That's very well done.
thank you. I should have time. What time oh yes, I'll definitely have time. The next one I'm going to do, I'm actually going to tie in what I started doing lately for to make it real convenient to do a hopper dropper. When I went to Colorado this last August, the 4 or 5 times that I fished, 3 of the times I actually used a stimulator like this. One was the peacock version that I'll do next. And I use this as there's so much about this that makes it float. You've got the stiff dry fly hackle palmered down the body. And then up front, you've got the hackle. Of course, you've got deer or elk hair. And if you treat it with a floating, this thing will float like a cork. If you hang just a little small midge, I wouldn't do like too big of a bead head, especially not a tungsten, but small midge. What I started doing was to have an emerger. So it actually floated in the surface film, but it was about a foot back from where the stimulator was. And the emerger could be like a little bit under the surface film, but it would hang, pretty close to the surface film, and it would just be a lot of times they would just take that emerger. If you are in a place, you've got some of these in your fly box, they're kind of fun to tie. I like doing this fly. So a lot of times I won't do like foam hoppers and everything else. If I can get away from synthetics and foam and stuff, I'll do it. But if there's hoppers around, grease your leader, grease this a little bit, and float it for a hopper. But it's definitely a good floater for a dry dropper. Is there any questions on this before I go to the next version? All right, the next one I think is cool. Pretty similar, but let me put my dubbing back. So where's my, there it is. Ended up on the floor like everything does. Switch cameras here real quick. So no more dubbing. No more orange thread. I'm gonna use black for this one. But I'm gonna use this is a Select Cow Elk natural. It's a little bit darker in color. And I want those darker tips just because of the coloration of this fly. A little bit darker color for the wing and a little bit darker tips. I'm not sure how much these cost, but they were probably around $5 at the most for a pretty good patch, 2x2 of this elk hair. For the body, instead of dubbing for the abdomen, I'm going to use peacock herl. And I will probably use that for the thorax as well. And on this one, I'm going to use, I've been using this, it's a leader material, 20-pound test. And I'm going to use a piece of that to actually make a little loop to do a dry dropper so you don't have to tie it to the bend of the hook. So back to the hook. Same hook. Move this elk out of the way and close that dubbing wax because I already put my elbow in it. All right, so for this one, I'm going to use black thread. Again, I'll mark off that 1/3 point just to keep myself honest. Again, of course, this is supposed to represent a stonefly originally. But tied in smaller sizes, it could be a yellow Sally, which I think is actually, isn't that kind of a stonefly? And even smaller, it could be in a caddisfly. So with this mono, if I had a needle nose pliers that has like the grooves in the end of it, if you just take that needle nose pliers and pinch it like that, it'll put grooves in the mono. And that really helps to, in a situation like this, to make it less likely to pull out. So what I'm doing here is I've got this mono on the off side, you know, the distant side for me. And I'm going to come forward. I don't want to mess up like the shape of the body too much. So I'm going to just kind of leave it horizontal, like right even with the hook shank on one side. Then I'm going to bend this mono back around. And I'm going to take a few wraps back toward the back. And then make sure I'm on my side of the hook shank. Like that. And then start getting a little bit tighter. But I want to make sure that that loop isn't real big. I don't want it to stick out there too far. So I'm going to go about maybe right there. I want to be able to get to it under that tail. And then I'm going to finish wrapping this back with touching turns if I can. And I didn't do it yet, I suppose an engineer would tell me it's probably too late. And I'm going to put just a little bit of super glue back here just to give me a little bit of extra insurance that that won't pull through if I get a 20-inch brown hanging off of the bottom fly. So when I'm done, I'm going to have just that little loop of mono hanging off the butt of the fly right there. And I can either have my droppers on a little loop, like a little length of mono, you know, maybe 8 to 12 inches or longer if you want, with a little loop not tight on the end of it. And then you could do like a loop to loop if you want to that.
And if
So
you
that loop
snelled
right
your
there.
droppers, if you snelled your droppers, Mike, that would make it real easy, wouldn't it?
Right, right. Or you could just tie to that as well. And that 20-pound mono, that's going to hold up pretty good. So flip off the rest of this mono that I don't need. And I don't know if you noticed, but I went to the back of my scissors for that because I don't want to dull the tips. I'll set that over there for another fly. I'm going to grab this darker. This is the cow elk. And again, I just grabbed it not necessarily because it was cow elk, but because of the color. Clip it away from the hide. And again, I'll grab these outer tips and just pull all that stuff away from the base. I think I'm going to use a comb on this one. It's in there somewhere. There it is. Just reach in there, make sure I got all that under fur out and the little small guys. Put it back in my stacker. I want the tips to be toward the back. Now, if you look on this, if you want to be a perfectionist, there's a broken tip in there. I don't know if you can see that. Let me try to focus on it. There's a little broken tip in there, and you can just reach in there, and since all the other tips are narrow, and oh, I just proved myself a liar. Usually you can grab that, and since it's fatter, that broken tip, it'll pull it out of there. So I'm gonna go ahead and restack these. But I got the broken tip out. Now they all look pretty good. So again, I'm gonna kind of measure my tail. I want it to be about a hook gap. And then I want to tie it down about right here. So I'm going to cut that over the waist bin. Come forward and do that little starburst right there. Maybe another little tight one. And then I can take loose wraps back to that end point right there. That's a little too short. Let me try to do that again if I can.
Was it that short, Mike? Would it make it difficult to make the loop-to-loop connection due to the density of the hair?
No, I mean, it might. But what I'm more concerned with is I want that tail to mess with the surface film. I want that tail to like actually help hold this fly up. So I want to make sure that when it's all said and done, I have about a hook gap back there. That's a little better. So what happens is when that when this lands on the water, you've got the hackle to help hold it up, but you also have this elk here is stiff back here and it's buoyant. So that's going to break that surface tension and keep the butt of the fly from sinking down. So I can still, like, you know, pick that tail up and be able to get to that loop. And then actually, when I go to fish these, I actually spread that out quite a bit too. I'll take the tail like that and go like that, because it's not so much like what a stonefly looks like when it's on the water, but I want that to float that fly. So I want to make sure that tail is splayed out when it lands on the water. I need a rib again, so I should have a piece of wire somewhere. And when you can't find it, you grab another one. That's why I got a big piece, so I could use it again, but I'll grab another piece. And with this wire, usually I just kind of tuck it under the little heel there. Zoom out some here. Tuck it under the holder there, and you can just, it's brittle enough, you can just break that stuff loose. You don't have to dull your scissors. And now that I set that down, I see my other piece of wire. It's right here. Oh well. Tie that wire back, and that's what I'm going to use for my rib. And now, instead of dubbing, I'm going to use some peacock herl. Now, you could use strung peacock herl if that's what you have. I have some real nice long and bushy pearls here on this eye. So I'm going to grab maybe 3 of these. I kind of was inclined to say 2, but I'm going to grab 3, just be on the safe side. Sometimes one will break. I'm going to come up toward the tips, and usually the first ½ inch to 1 inch is pretty brittle, so I'll just cut about 3/4 of an inch off of there. And I'm tying this in by the tips. Now, because I'm going to have a hackle and a wire going across this peacock herl, I'm not going to try to reinforce this using my thread like I usually do. I'm just going to take this peacock herl and, using the weight of the thread on the bobbin here, I'm going to keep moving this forward. And what that does, every time you go up against that, it keeps these peacock herls sandwiched together, but it also fluffs out those little micro barbs there on the peacock herl and makes it nice and fluffy. I'm going to go ahead and tie these off, and then one at a time, and break them. Since I'm holding my thread tight, that's not going to break the rest of it. So there's my body. Now, for this fly, I'm actually going to use a kind of a dun color. I want this to be a little bit darker. I think, be on the safe side, I'm going to use this shorter one or longer one, sorry, for the abdomen. Again, I'll strip off about 9 or 5 of those. So I have a little bit of stem showing, and wrap that down nice and tight, get my thread out of the way. Then as I wrap that back, I'm going to go ahead and go right into that peacock herl and palmer through it. Right back to the tail. And then I'm going to take the wire 1 turn just to be able to let go of that hackle. Actually, I'm going to clip that over here out of the way. Well, maybe I can't since it's so curled. Then I'm just going to go fast through this with spaced wraps. Gives it a little bit of flash, but mostly it gives it security. Take a few wraps up there. I'm going to actually come back here. Go over that wire, hold it tight. There it is. And then wrap back to the end of my abdomen. And then I'll clip that off. So now I got a little bit darker of a body here, but I like that peacock curl. Then with my darker elk hair here, I'm going to grab about twice what I did for the tail, at least to start with. Clip it close to the hide. You always want to clip it as close as you can to the hide, because if you start getting like, halfway up, a little bit further up, a little bit further up, you're going to have all these butts down here that are hiding the rest of the hair, and it's going to be a mess. So clip it as close as you can to the hide, and then strip out the under fur and the shorties. And I'll put it in the stacker. All my tips are aligned real nice. Now, again, I want to go about halfway down the tail. And so right about here is where I want to tie it down. I just lost a few, but that's okay. I had plenty. Clip it off. Give a little bit of a spin so I know to reach back. And then go over those tips. Some tight wraps over that little sunburst right there. And then you know it's not going to come loose. Then I can kind of make some medium wraps back here, just to kind of gather that and control it like that. Now, you don't want to use like Semper Fly or something like that on something like this. You want thread with a little bit of bolt to it. So if you want to make a taper like this, you can do that without using half the spool. Whoop, sorry about that. Now, peacock curl again for the front. I think I'm only going to use one. Because I think that'll do. First, I'll tie in the front hackle. It's going to be palmered over the front part. Tie that back. Then my peacock curl. Tie that out of the way. All right, my peacock curl. Whoop. Again, I'm going to palmer through this, so that should secure that peacock curl. Okay. Nice fuzzy peacock head there. Wrap that back out of the way. And then should be long enough to not use a hackle pliers. Actually, I will. So I don't have to redo it. Famous last words. This should be long enough to know without a hackle pliers. Palmer it through that front. And whoops. Lost control. Do that again. Take a couple wraps over it. And then a couple wraps in front. Now, the reason I like these is a lot of the earlier hoppers we have are the shorter ones that are a little bit dark. They're grays and greens. They're not the big fat yellow ones. So these are real good representations of those smaller hoppers. But also if you have a darker stonefly, you know, way out west, that's a real good fly for those as well. And then again, this one has the little mono loop in the back to use for a dry dropper. So there's your stimulators.
Very nicely done, Mike. Thank you.
Any questions on this guy?